Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Marathon of History podcast. And as always, I am your host, Matt Johnson, the owner and bookkeeper and salesperson and production staff and design staff and everything else over here at Marathon of History, as well as the director of the West Grey Virtual Museum, which is a project that is steadily working away at here. And it's been a lot of fun for that. So welcome to the Marathon of History podcast. I'm not sure what number episode this is. I don't have that actually in front of me right now. I probably should have, but we've had a few and just getting tremendous feedback on the podcast. And for that, I just want to thank everybody who has taken the time to, whether reach out and shoot me a message or an email or, stop me on the street. We live in a pretty small town here, so sometimes you do get stopped on the street, which is awesome because I like to talk history. So I'm more than happy to talk about the podcast and talk history if I see you in the street. So thank you very much, everybody, for the support. It is truly, truly appreciated. Today on the podcast, again, it's just going to be me because I do have several really good guest interviews in the vault, if you will, but they do have to be edited because when I talk to a guest, usually on the podcast, typically I end up talking about a lot of things, and the interviews go on for a long time because if you know me, you know I like to talk. So I have to usually pare those down because I try to keep the Marathon of History podcasts short and sweet. So nobody wants to hear me talk about history and then talk about the Maple Leafs and then talk about my favorite kind of beer and then talk a little bit about history and then talk about pizza and then talk about something else. So you want to hear me talk about history because that's what the Marathon of History podcast is all about. So I have to edit out those interviews that I've done with guests, and that takes a bit of time. So that's why you just have to hear me talk today. And really, probably the thing we probably should talk about is Canada Day. And it was 3 days ago now. This is July 3rd, so I guess 2 days ago now. And first, I just want to take a chance to wish everybody a very happy Canada Day. And I really think that this year Canada Day means more than perhaps what it has in the past. And not to belittle past Canada Days at all. I just think with everything going on, sort of this renewed sense of being Canadian or sense of not being American. I think this Canada Day, it is special. And from what I saw, it was a lot of people recognizing that. And, my wife and I, we took a walk over to the arena here and saw the Canada Day festivities, and there was a lot of people there. And that's always good to see. And in a small town, of course, West Grey, I have to big shout out to the West Grey Lions Club, who organize these Canada Day events and work tirelessly in the community to do good. And they organized another great Canada Day event this year. And if you slide over to the Marathon of History or West Grey Lions Facebook page, you'll see a pretty neat aerial view of the fireworks that I took on Tuesday evening about 10 o'clock from my backyard, actually. I flew my drone to about 350 feet in the air and managed to get some pretty cool top-down views of the fireworks. So check that out if you want. Canada Day for me is a celebration of everything. Being a historian, it's a celebration of everything historical that led us to where we are now. And that can, again, mean a lot of things. And which sort of brings me to something I wanted to talk about today. And that is how, as Canadians, why is it that we always seem to want to find the bad in our history? And my question to that is, why do we want to find the bad? But more important, who is encouraging finding the bad, and who is finding the bad, and why does it get any traction? History, when asked, I explain history. As a historian, I do get asked about some of these controversial Canadian history topics and, controversial topics from wherever, sort of my take on it. And history is not black and white, if you will. You have to take the good, the bad, and the indifferent. As I've said before many times, history is 1% bad, 1% good, and the other 98% is pretty gray and pretty mundane. And that's Canadian history for sure. But we do have a lot of good and a lot of bad. And for some reason, the recent focus has been on the bad without any sort of balancing towards the side of good. And it's really not a holistic view, if you ask me. It's not realistic to celebrate Canadian history and say, every single thing that ever happened in Canadian history is awesome, and that's all we should ever talk about. That's not what I'm saying. Canadian history has dark periods, it has great periods, and a lot of in between periods. And just like it's not realistic to say everything is great, we don't need to ever talk about the bad, it's also the truth in the converse of that. Everything was not always bad. And if we're going to talk about the bad, we have to talk about both sides of it. And I realize that I'm sort of sticking my head in a noose here, saying these things as a professional historian. Um, that's not an opinion. In the history world with professional historians, that is the opinion. The opinion is that history has to be looked at in a rounded approach and it has to be studied. Both sides of all issues have to be extensively studied before any sort of opinion can be formed. And all opinions have to be formed with the fact that it was always taking place in a different time. History is everything that happened not now. And all eras are different. And you have to really study all sides of issues and then frame it all up in the context that it was a different time before you can form an opinion. And again, it just seems that as Canadians, we are looking for always the negative and always hammering away at that point. I shouldn't say as Canadians, it's not all Canadians. It's just a very vocal amount of Canadians doing this. My best example of this, and to be honest, and again, I'm really sticking my head in the news now, is John A. Macdonald. And John A. Macdonald was a human being. John A. Macdonald was a politician. John A. Macdonald is a historical figure. John A. Macdonald was not perfect, but John A. Macdonald did some good. And it just seems that the recent attitude towards Canadian history, John A. Macdonald forms a perfect sort of sample size of everything right now. And one thing I often say about Macdonald is he is arguably, again, arguably, everything in history is arguably, he is arguably the only reason we are not American. And, before Confederation, Canada either joining the US or being taken over by the US economically or other means was a very real possibility. And it wasn't for people like John A. Macdonald, and there was others who had the vision of a separate country of Canada under sort of the British in the British Empire under the British Crown, but a separate country, um, very separate from the United States. And if it wasn't for these visions of these people, we might not be Canadian now. And this seems to be, especially when you're relating to John A. Macdonald, this seems to be just kind of shoved aside right now. It's kind of the cool thing to say he was awful and this is all the bad stuff he did, and we need to rename some buildings that used to be called John A. Macdonald. We need to name them something else now because he had some skeletons in his closet, if you will. And I don't agree with it. I think it's lazy history to do that, to be quite honest. To just simply look at one person and say, oh, they're bad, done. It's lazy. I don't like to use that word very often, but when we're dealing with somebody who's not, very cut and dried, evil or not evil, as we've had, dictators and things like that in the past, but to look at a historical figure, a fairly mundane historical figure, if you will, in the overall scheme of things, and just go, yeah, he did these bad things, so he's bad. Let's write him out of history, or write him off as a villain in history. To me, that's lazy, and it takes effort to look at fully rounded approaches to history and fully rounded stories and to tell stories properly. And I just don't think that that is happening right now in Canada. And again, I am not, I need to keep saying this. I am not for 1 second saying that Canada had no bad in our past and that we shouldn't acknowledge that bad things happened in our past. People were treated very poorly by other people in our past, and those things need to be talked about. They weren't always talked about. In fact, they were never talked about back in the day. If you flip through an old history textbook from, say, the 20s or 30s, which I have a few of in my collection, they're pretty cool. But if you flip through those, they don't talk at all about the bad side of history. So we've actually done a complete 180, I think, where now all we do is talk about the bad side and don't really talk about the good side. And I just don't like it. I just don't like how it's taught. And to be quite honest, it's not professional historians in general that are doing this. It is we do live in the era of social media. We do live in the era of trying to get views and likes and blah blah blah. And it certainly is. Every story has to be polarizing, or else nobody views it. And so it's just easy to write a Canadian history story and say this person's the worst person that ever lived, and that's it, because it will get clicks, it will get views. Not a lot of people are going to click on a story that says, here's a well-rounded view with facts on both sides of this individual. It just doesn't happen, except perhaps in the world of historians and history buffs and people who are really into Canadian history. But for the average Canadian, it just doesn't have any traction. And really, the side effects of this are bad. As far as when we deal with the population of Canada, say I don't know the numbers for sure, but maybe 5% of people are super interested in Canadian history, and 5% of people really couldn't care less. So the other 90% of people are just sort of in the middle. They care about history. They want to know more. And when the only message out there, in mainstream media, social media, when the only message out there is, Canadian history individuals were all awful and we were just the worst. That's the opinion that people who are sort of in the middle, who are just interested in history, but not necessarily going to study it at a super high level. And that's okay. I'm not knocking those people at all. Everybody has their interests. But the problem is then that that's what they take away. And I ran into this once at a function, and it came up about certain things about Canadian history, and somebody just sort of went off about how Canada used to have death camps, and um, we were just as bad as these people, and all this, and it was really frustrating to listen to because it was false, and but you just couldn't argue with it, and it's really a situation that is bothersome. As I said, as a Canadian historian, I recently led a historical hike, heritage hike here in Durham, where I'm the historian in residence at the West Grade Library. And, another great example of sort of what we're talking about is we started talking about the Canadian Pacific Railroad. And, there's another polarizing topic in Canadian history. And yeah, yeah, it was bad. There was corruption. People made money, underhandedly made money. Um, it was lots of bad things happened creating the Canadian Pacific Railroad. I can't even start to say. The treatment of the Indigenous people, for example, was deplorable, and that needs to be talked about. But it also needs to be talked about how the Canadian Pacific Railroad again probably kept Canada together as a country, and it just seems that when you start talking about it, there's all of a sudden a segment that needs to step up and really hammer away at the bad, hammer away at the bad, and I just feel it's so polarizing. It's a good example of how Canadian history is so polarizing, and it's just something that is not going to change. I don't see it changing in the era of social media. I think it's up to professional historians and people who know history to really stress that the viewpoints of Canadian history need to be more rounded, and they need to be looked at from all sides. And it is a responsibility to present those views, but those it's not on social media, in the comment section, That's not necessarily where the views need to be put forth from. It's up to honestly, it's up to museums, it's up to professionals to present both sides of the view. Um, Sometimes that's going to be hard. Sometimes it's not going to be easy to present all sides of a view, whether good, bad, or whatever. But it needs to be done because history needs to be told and taught properly, not political polarized is the word I'm looking for. History needs to be not taught from a polarized angle. It needs to be taught from a fully rounded approach, and that takes work. And we need to put in that work as Canadians. I just briefly want to talk about something else that happened on July 1st, and of course, Canada Day, and that gets all the recognition, as it should. But 1916, on July 1st, something very bad happened for the then Newfoundland, which was not part of Canada at that point. It was still a separate entity in the British Empire. Um, but Newfoundland had its own Newfoundland Regiment in the First World War in the British Army. I believe it was in the 29th Division. I don't have that in front of me. I'm sure my friends at Liberation Tours will quickly inform me if I was wrong about that, but I believe the Royal Newfoundland Regiment fought in the 29th Division and of the British Army. And when I call it a regiment, what a regiment is actually in Canada is it is a battalion, and a battalion-sized force on paper was somewhere roughly around 1,000 soldiers and officers. Again, it varied. And then, of course, during the war, a battalion was never at full strength due to everything, people getting wounded, no replacements, soldiers being sick, soldiers on courses, soldiers on leave. So, battalion on paper was usually around 1,000. Again, don't rip me apart. I realize that the numbers are more precise than that, but that's not the point of this podcast. Battalion is around 1,000. I believe on July 1st, 1916, before the Battle of the Somme, I believe the Royal Newfoundland Regiment was not far from full strength. I think they were around 800, I think. Again, those numbers are out there. But in the morning of July 1st, 1916, 7:30 in the morning, the British Fourth Army attacked along the River Somme and north of the River Somme, and the French armies fought south of the River Somme. But we're talking about the north, and the British armies, the soldiers went over the top, if you will, towards German positions that they were told had been completely wiped out by several weeks of heavy bombardment. Quite a show, quite a spectacular bombardment went on, and the 29th Division attacked a place near a place called Beaumont Hamel. And what happened was the first wave at Beaumont Hamel went over the top, and they were absolutely cut to pieces. And they didn't make it very far. If you go to Beaumont Hamel, you can sort of see why the soldiers stepped out of their trenches, the British soldiers, that is, and were immediately silhouetted against the sky. They were sort of had to go down through a valley where German machine guns had them completely covered from three sides. It was a massacre. So the first wave went over the top and did not fare well, and the Royal Newfoundland Regiment was in reserve. And through some various I guess you could say miscommunications or mismanagements or a combination of both. The Royal Newfoundland Regiment was then sent in. Um, they were supposed to be sent in to exploit or sort of reinforce once German positions had been taken, but they were sort of mistakenly somewhat sent in uh, before it was realized that the first wave of the assault had been completely wiped out. So, of course, when the first wave was wiped out, the trenches from the frontline trenches to the rear were completely jammed with wounded soldiers and people running ammunition and runners and all these things. So the Newfoundland Regiment is in the reserve trenches. So they're ordered into the battle. And they can't get through the communication trenches to the jumping off trenches. So they say, you know what, let's just go overland. So up they go uh, behind the British front line at this point, mind you. And the German positions have not been destroyed by the bombardment. The first wave has not had basically any tell on the German forces. The German forces are still very strong, and the Royal Newfoundland Regiment walks into a massacre. And they were completely wiped out as a fighting unit on July 1st, 1916. I forget the exact percentage. It was in the high 80s of the soldiers that became casualties. Very, very, very few were left to reform the battalion after that. And when you go to Beaumont Hamel nowadays, to me, it is almost without words. Because you can still they've left all the fields full of shell craters, and you get a somewhat sense of where everything was on July 1st. And when you sort of see where the Newfoundland position was, you see where the German position was, you see where the German position was, and you see where the Newfoundland regiment was asked to go. It it brings up some emotion, that's for sure, because you can just see right there, there was no way that regiment was doing uh, getting through without extremely heavy casualties. And as it turned out, that was the result. So, of course, every year on July 1st in Newfoundland, it's recognized. That event is recognized, and it's a pretty somber occasion. So, I'm sure for people from Newfoundland, it's sort of a strange day. It's a day of reflection, but also a day of celebrating Canada. So, next time on Canada Day, just give a little thought to our friends in Newfoundland. And of course, if you want to read more about Beaumont Hamel, there's lots of really great books out there. Um, Make sure you're do some reading, do some sourcing. There's lots of great stuff at the Canadian War Museum, Canadian Encyclopedia, lots of places that can get you started. And of course, you can always send me an email or message if you want, and I can help you on the way to find some great resources. So as I said, I don't have a whole heck of a lot more to talk about this week. It's just want to talk a little bit about Canada Day, and the West Grey Museum is we're still working away. When I started the West Grey Virtual Museum, I realized that this was going to be a long process, and it is a long process. But I just want to thank those who have really stepped up and have sent in some really cool artifacts and written some stories. And I'm really hoping to get all that uploaded to the website over the next little bit. It's a fair job to do that. And of course, running my business full time, I don't always have time to get at that, but I hope to. And it's not that I don't appreciate everything everybody sent in. I really, really do appreciate it. It's awesome. And I think the West Grey Virtual Museum is going to be a little gem once we get it going. I really, really, truly do. Uh, the chances of us getting a physical museum in West Grey are probably less than 0%, but the West Grey Virtual Museum is really going to bring some great local stories and historical programming, if you will, to the local community. And along that note, again, I want to send a big shout out to the West Grey Durham Lions Club. They do so much for the community. It's just unbelievable when you look at the projects they're involved in. And one of the most recent ones that involved my business Marathon of History is the production of a heritage display in the Durham Community Center, the Durham Arena. And what we did there was I built a pretty large display base with a removable top and storage, and it's on wheels and all these fancy things. And it's going to be a rotating display of community history, community artifacts, and the idea when I met with the Lions Club, their idea, not mine, their idea, it was a really good idea, was that they wanted a display base where people could bring items of historical interest that were important to them, and we could display it for the community. And I would help them curate an exhibit, and we would, label it and tag it and promote it. And people from the town could come into the arena, whether they're there for a hockey game or you know, one of the many events that goes on at the arena, and sort of check out the rotating exhibit. And generally, the idea is every couple months we're going to switch it up. So it's going to be sort of a super mini museum, but I've uh, I've got a goal to really pack that full of great information, and I really want that to be a center for people to check out some really cool Durham heritage stories. So I really have to thank the West Grey Lions Club, number one for supporting Marathon of History, having me build the display base. I really do appreciate that. But number two, for their commitment to the community and commitment to telling heritage stories. And I just think they're just such a great group of people. So anything I can do to, help them along that journey, I am, as far as historical things go. And they've done a great job, and I will certainly be posting on social media and whatnot when that exhibit is ready to view. We're hoping by the end of July, so I will definitely keep you posted on that. Okay, a couple other things I just want to talk about really quick on the podcast is my friends over at Liberation Tours have a couple of really great tours this fall that still have, I believe, for the Northwest Europe Canadian Battlefield Tour, I believe there's still I think 1 or 2 rooms left as of right now, I believe. And that tour goes from September 19th until October 3rd. And during that tour, essentially what I tell people when they're asking me about Liberation Tours is we pick you up at the airport in France, in Paris, and drop you off in Amsterdam 15 days later. And it's really a great way to see Europe, see the battlefields. You can just sit back and relax in a super luxury coach that has washrooms and really, really comfortable buses. And expert historians on board the buses. You have expert travel consultants or travel guides with you as well, I should say. Usually it's going to be John Cannon, the owner, so he's incredibly knowledgeable. You're in great hands. It's a fantastic tour. I was lucky enough to work with Liberation Tours and be a part of this tour in the spring. And I mean, it is a highlight reel of Canadian history, Canadian military history. You see D-Day beaches, you go to Dieppe, and then, of course, all the First World War sites, Amiens, Arras, Vimy, Ypres. You spend a couple nights in Ypres up in Belgium, Arnhem, Bridge Too Far, like just great stuff. So if you're interested in that, they, like I said, I think there might be a couple of rooms left in that. Check out liberationtours.ca or message me. I can help point you in the right direction as far as getting more information about those tours. And the other one is the Italian Campaign Battlefield Tour, and that runs from October 6th to 20th, 2025. And again, I think there is limited rooms left on that. I'll have to check. It might be sold out. It might be 1 or 2 left. This trip, you can't find a better guide for Second World War, Italian campaign, Canadian fighting. Mark Zolke is the guide on this one. And I don't have it in front of me, but I believe Mark has 6 books he's written just on the Italian campaign. And for a theater of the war that often is, I don't want to use the word overlooked because it did get a bit of attention now as we went through the 80th anniversary, but it is often overlooked compared to the Northwest Europe frontier. So Mark has done exceptional work recounting all of the Canadian campaign throughout Sicily and Italy, 1943, 44, and he is the guide. He is the head historian on that tour. And from what I've heard, if you love history and you also love food and you also love wine, the Italian campaign tour is a spot for you. So check that out again, liberationtours.ca. And that's October 6th to 20th. And I know a few people have been on this one. I've not been on this one myself yet, but who just absolutely loved it. I think they were just blown away by the history on top of the scenery and the, of course, wonderful weather you'll encounter in Italy in October. It's a great time of year to go. So that's coming up at Liberation Tours and marathonofhistory.ca. You can always check out. We have, of course, the spring issue of the magazine, 100% free to read online. Some great stories in there this month. And while you're there, you can check out some of our newest releases in the museum heritage toy model souvenir series. We've got a Churchill tank. We just released a Buffalo, LVT-4 Buffalo, and a Universal Carrier. What else have we just released? That might be it right now for the last couple of months, but there's lots there anyways. So, as I said, I appreciate each and every person who takes the time to listen to the podcast, supports Marathon of History, supports Liberation Tours, supports your local museums. Get out there this summer. There's some great stuff, some great historical events, and as always, you can always contact me for any historical questions or if you want to get point in the right direction for a historical family activity in the area. Just shoot me a message. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of, whether it's by email, mjohnson@marathonofhistory.ca, or shoot me a message on the Marathon of History Facebook page, or just go to the website. There's contact forms there. I try to get right back to you, so I appreciate that. And I just want to say have a great summer until you hear from me next time, and stay safe, have fun, and happy Canada Day.